Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your archbishop of Banterbury, your chancellor of cheerfulness, your pharaoh of physical media, and of course, well, not yet, but your evangelist of the imagination. That's right, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am once again Robcasting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity. This is Robservations, episode number 587. Welcome. Boy, a lot of stuff happening, a lot of stuff going on. You'd think the time between Christmas and New Year's is one of my favorite times in Los Angeles because I used to love wandering around the city because nobody was here. Well, now there's nowhere to wander to. There's a great storm raging outside. We had more thunder and lightning than I've ever seen, well, in quite some time last night, and that was a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm quite enjoying this middle period between Christmas and New Year's. I don't know what you'd call it. I mean, it's like between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we've got the days of awe. So what do you call the time between Christmas and New Year's Eve? I don't know, and New Year's itself. We should come up with some kind of a name, maybe an imagination connoisseur name that only we will call it. I don't know what that is, but I'm sure we can come up with something. I have to tell you, over the weekend, I think that I have not seen something cause such, well, I don't know, the discussion about Wonder Woman 84 has been, a lot of people I think are more than anything else perplexed by it. The Critical Drinker on YouTube dropped a great review, and I think what's really funny, I'm a big fan of the Critical Drinker. I was on his show I was on December 7th of this month, where we talked about Star Trek: The Motion Picture on its 41st anniversary, which I loved. But it was interesting watching his review of Wonder Woman 84 because I felt that he wanted it to be good. Like he's not just sharpening his talons to tear into something just to tear into something. I really feel that a lot of his reviews, while, of course, the Critical Drinker is a character, and he sometimes leans into that really heavily, I think his reviews and his analysis of story are really quite good. And whether you buy into that persona of his or not, I think regardless, his analysis of cinema is very valid, and I really enjoy his channel quite a bit and have for a long time now. But I think I listened to his review of Wonder Woman 84, and I agreed with everything he said, but I felt a tinge of sadness in his review, and I kind of felt that way too. Like, I was really looking forward to Wonder Woman 84. I went into it ready to embrace this movie. I really liked the first Wonder Woman. I like what Patty Jenkins did. I like Gal Gadot as the character. So, as I've said before, I was an easy lay for this movie. I didn't need a whole lot of foreplay or, not a lot of skill. I was ready and waiting and willing to throw myself on this film with abandon. And I was disappointed. And, sometimes I know when things aren't going to necessarily be good, but I don't feel sadness or disappointment. But this movie made me feel disappointed because I think a lot of people were really excited for this film, and I know there's a lot of women I know in the entertainment business. Some of them are writers who I greatly respect, who really liked the first film. It really meant something to them, and they were offended by this movie, which I was like, huh. But anyway, as is always good, they've greenlit, or they've moved. It's not been greenlit yet. It's been fast-tracked. We talked about this yesterday. But what was really interesting is John Campea on his show this morning brought an article to my attention that I think is absolutely worth sharing. It was in the New York Times yesterday, and it's about Walter Hamada. And Walter Hamada, of course, is now charting. He's over at Warner Brothers. And if you've ever seen Walter Hamada speak, and he spoke at DC Fandom, he is a very, very intelligent guy. And he and I are almost the same age, and I find him to be very impressive. I really am a fan of his and what he was doing, or what he's trying to do over at Warner Brothers. And I wanted to share this interview that was in the New York Times with all of you and see what you think, because I think it's really worth sharing. Can't really see him here. Let me see if I can bring this down so you can actually see Walter Hamada. There he is. Very classy guy. Got to say, I love his hair. And, I wish I could rob. Maybe I'll go for that hairstyle. It's pretty good. But here's the article. Managing movie superheroes is about to get a lot more complicated. Walter Hamada, who runs DC Films, is overseeing a dizzying number of projects, part of a swarm of comics-based stories coming from Hollywood. Now, before I really get into all of this, obviously, the superhero genre has sort of taken over Hollywood, certainly taken over the collective imaginations of many moviegoers. And I think rightfully so. The thing about the superhero genre is, to me, you can tell a lot of different stories underneath that umbrella. And yeah, of course, you've got the hero's journey, the obvious one, the origin story, and then our protagonist comes to fight evil or save the world or something. But as we've discovered, anyone who's a comic book reader can see what, for instance, Frank Miller did with Daredevil on the pages of that comic, and how Frank Miller has returned to Daredevil throughout the years, whether he was doing Elektra Assassin with Bill Sienkiewicz or coming back and doing the Born Again storyline. There's a lot of material to be mined within and underneath the genre and the umbrella of a superhero story. And I think one of the things that I was really looking forward to about Wonder Woman 84 was to see how Diana, her ongoing relationship with, well, she calls it man's world, but let's just say the outside world, how that relationship was going to develop with her. And it was interesting to me, as we even heard her say in Batman v Superman, or maybe it was in Justice League, that she turned her back on man's world for 100 years. Wonder Woman 84 directly contradicts this, the fact that she is a part of man's world, and apparently within the confines of the DCEU, nobody remembers the great nuclear conflagration of 1984 when the missiles were flying, but everybody was granted a wish and whatever. So I can only assume this movie takes place in some other corner of the multiverse. But regardless, I wanted to read what Mr. Hamada was saying, because obviously, DC has been playing catch-up. Warner Brothers has been playing catch-up with Marvel since the beginning, since 2008 and the release of Iron Man. But Walter Hamada is a man that has a lot to say. Walter Hamada is not a typical superhero wrangler. He doesn't have a boomerang, fanboy-in-chief personality. His modest home office, at least as it appears on Zoom, is light on the usual cape and cowl collectibles. Hollywood was not even his first calling. He set out to be a mechanical engineer. As the president of DC Films, however, Mr. Hamada, 52, manages the movie careers of Wonder Woman, Batman, Cyborg, The Flash, Superman, and every other DC Comics superhero, and the new course he has charted for them is dizzying. The most expensive DC movies, up to 4 a year starting in 2022, are designed for release in theaters, Mr. Hamada said. Additional superhero films, 2 annually is the goal, perhaps focused on riskier characters like Batgirl and Static Shock, will arrive exclusively on HBO Max, the fledgling streaming service owned by Warner Media. In addition, DC Films, which is part of Warner Brothers, will work with filmmakers to develop movie offshoots, TV series that will run on HBO Max and interconnect with their big screen endeavors. With every movie that we're looking at now, we're thinking, what's the potential Max spin-off, Mr. Hamada said. If you thought there was a glut of superheroes before, oh, just wait. To make all the storylines work, DC Films will introduce movie audiences to comics concept known as the multiverse, parallel worlds where different versions of the same character exist simultaneously. Coming up, for instance, Warner Brothers will have 2 different film sagas involving Batman, played by 2 different actors, running at the same time. The complicated plan involves a sharp increase in production. Last year, Warner Brothers made 2 live-action superhero movies, Joker and Shazam. In 2018, there was only Aquaman. All 3 were smash hits, underscoring the financial opportunity of making more. For various reasons, including creative misfires and management turnover at DC Films, Mr. Hamada took over in 2018, Warner Brothers has badly trailed Disney-owned Marvel at the box office. Over the last decade, Warner Brothers has generated $8 billion in worldwide superhero ticket sales, including $36 million from Warner Brothers 1984 over the weekend. Marvel has taken in $20.6 billion. Suffice it to say, Warner Brothers, which invented the big-budget superhero movie in 1978 with Superman, has been under pressure to get its act together. Disney has succeeded in part because its divisions collaborate in a way that siloed Warner Brothers never has. But that is changing. AT&T mandated greater cross-company synergy when it took over Warner Media in 2018. In the past, we were so secretive, Mr. Hamada said. It was shocking to me, for example, how few people at the company were actually allowed to read scripts for the movies we're making. More than ever, studios are leaning on pre-established characters and brands, especially if their corporate parents are building streaming services. HBO Max has 12.6 million subscriber activations. Netflix has 195 million. How do you delight Wall Street and quickly close the gap? You start by putting your superheroes to work. This month, Disney announced 100 new movies and shows for the next few years, most of them headed directly to its Disney Plus streaming service, which has 87 million subscribers. Marvel is chipping in 11 films and 11 television shows, including WandaVision, which arrives on January 15th, and finds Elizabeth Olsen reprising her Scarlet Witch role from the Avengers franchise. Warner Brothers has at least as many comic-based movies in various stages of gestation, including a Suicide Squad sequel, The Batman, in which Robert Pattinson plays the Caped Crusader, and Black Adam, starring Dwayne Johnson as the villainous title character. Television spin-offs from The Batman and the Suicide Squad are headed to HBO Max. Warner Media's traditional television division has roughly 25 additional live-action and animated superhero shows, including Superman and Lois, which arrives on the CW network in February. Sony Pictures Entertainment has its own superhero slate with at least 2 more Spider-Man movies in the works, Morbius, starring Jared Leto as a pseudo-vampire, and the sequel to Venom, which cost $100 million to make in 2018 and collected $856 million worldwide. Sony also has a suite of superhero TV shows headed for Amazon Prime Video. And don't forget Valiant Entertainment, which is turning comics properties such as Harbinger about superpowered teenagers into movies with partners like Paramount. Superheroes have long been Hollywood's most reliable moneymakers, especially when sales of related merchandise are included. Wonder Woman Tiara for Cats on sale for $59.50. But how much speeding spandex and computer-generated visual effects can audiences take? More than you think, said David A. Gross, who runs Franchise Entertainment Research, a film consultancy. If the stories are well written and the production values are strong, he said, then there will be little sign of fatigue. Perhaps the biggest challenge facing Warner Brothers involves the recent prioritization of HBO Max. The risk is, will watching these movies first on television degrade the entertainment experience and later the value? Yes, it will. But that doesn't mean, this is me editorializing, that doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to be a bad thing in the long run. The risk is, will watching these movies first on television degrade the entertainment value experience and later the value, Mr. Gross said. For an individual movie, there is no more profitable business model than a successful theatrical release, creating the biggest pop culture event possible. It's the locomotive that pulls the entire train: merchandise, theme park licensing, other income. This is something that you cannot stress enough. When a movie comes out in the theater and does well, it's not just that it made money. It's that it makes an imprint across popular culture. It becomes something that people talk about. It generates its own audience by creating word of mouth if it turns out to be great. And that's how a movie gets value, because once its pop culture value or credibility is established in the marketplace, such as being a great box office success, then it gets ingrained in our, the whisper stream, call it. I stole that from Andrew Vox, the whisper stream of popular culture, where people are like, hey man, have you seen this or whatever? And people talk about it. So a box office success creates its own value simply because it does. It becomes a self-perpetuating, it's almost like a von Neumann machine, where it's self-perpetuating and builds upon itself. On Friday, Warner Brothers released Wonder Woman 84 in North America, where it collected $16.7 million. Citing the coronavirus pandemic, only 39% of cinemas in the United States are open. The studio simultaneously debuted the film in theaters and on HBO Max. Warner Brothers will release its entire 2021 slate in the same hybrid fashion. By the way, The Little Things, the new Denzel Washington movie coming out, I'm deliriously excited for. It's completely not on my radar till I saw the trailer. If you have not watched the trailer, if you like serial killer stories like Silence of the Lambs and Seven and Copycat, whatever, if you like those kinds of stories, and I do, Brian Fuller's Hannibal TV series, this movie looks right up, my alley. Rami Malek, Jared Leto, and Denzel. That is also going to be a day-and-date release on HBO Max next month. And I'm like, it's a movie I'm really excited to see. Warner Media provided only vague information about the sequel's performance on HBO Max, saying in a news release that millions of subscribers watched it on Friday. Andy Forssell, Warner Media's direct-to-consumer general manager, said the movie exceeded our expectations across all of our key viewing and subscriber metrics. Toby Emmerich, president of the Warner Brothers Pictures Group, said on Sunday that he had fast-tracked a third Wonder Woman movie. Our real-life Wonder Woman, Gal and Patty, will return to conclude the long-planned theatrical trilogy. Mr. Hamada rose to power through New Line, a Warner Brothers division that mostly makes mid-budget horror films and comedies. Among other achievements, he worked with filmmaker James Wan and others to build The Conjuring into a 6-film world with $1.8 billion in global ticket sales. The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, arrives in June. A lot of times in studio meetings, executives just repeat buzzwords and it becomes a joke, James Wan said. Walt always brings something constructive, useful, and important to the table. He talks to me in a language that I understand. Anytime, if you ever go back, I think it's DC Fandom, and if you watch Walter Hamada's interview, you'll know exactly what James Wan is talking about. When Mr. Hamada arrived at DC Films in 2018, the division was in urgent need of stability. 2 terrifyingly expensive movies, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice and Justice League, both directed by Zack Snyder, were deemed almost unwatchable by critics. Ben Affleck, who played Batman in the films, wanted to move on, complicating sequel plans. At the same time, filmmakers were developing other DC movies that had nothing to do with the existing storylines, and in fact contradicted some of them. Mr. Hamada and Mr. Emmerich had 2 options: figure out how to make the various storylines and character incarnations coexist, or start over. The answer is the multiverse. Boiled down, it means that some characters, Wonder Woman as portrayed by Gal Gadot for instance, will continue their adventures on Earth 1, while new incarnations, Mr. Pattinson as the Batman, will populate Earth 2. The Flash, a film set for release in theaters in 2022, will link the universes and feature 2 Batmans, with Mr. Affleck returning as one and Michael Keaton returning as the other. Mr. Keaton played Batman in 1989 and 1992. To complicate matters further, HBO Max gave Mr. Snyder more than $70 million to recut his Justice League and expand it with new footage. Mr. Snyder and Warner Brothers had clashed over his original vision, which the studio deemed overly grim, resulting in reshoots handled by a different director. Now, what's interesting about this New York Times article is it says Mr. Snyder and Warner Brothers had clashed over his original vision, which the studio deemed overly grim. Well, the story that, of course, we all know is that Zack and Deborah had a tragedy in their family, which is what caused him to step down. That was really just a smokescreen for what this reporter says is overly grim. Zack Snyder's Justice League is now 4 hours long, and it will arrive in segments on HBO Max in March. At least for now, Mr. Snyder is not part of the new DC Films blueprints, with the studio executives describing his HBO Max project as a storytelling cul-de-sac, a street that leads nowhere. Unless, of course, it's great, in which case, as John Campea said, winning changes everything. The multiverse concept is worked on television, but it is a risky strategy for big screens. Is it, though? Really? I don't think it is. These movies need to attract... You know who it's risky for? Studio executives that don't understand it. These movies need to attract the widest audience possible to justify their costs, and too much of a comic nerd sensibility can be a turnoff. New actors can take over a character. James Bond is the best example, but multiple Gothams spinning in theaters? I don't think anyone has ever attempted to do this, Mr. Hamada said, but audiences are sophisticated enough to understand it. If we make good movies, they will go with it. See, Walter Hamada, he's on it. He knows what is up. And I've always said that. I mean, I've always said that, look, we're all imagination connoisseurs. Everybody that's watching me or hearing my voice right now, y'all know that you could have got and grasped these concepts a long time ago. Anybody who thrilled at the third season Next Generation episode Yesterday's Enterprise, where literally reality was changed and the Federation was now put on a war footing, it was in the middle of a war with the Federation, understood that. We've watched alternate universes for a long time, whether it's been on different TV shows. Of course, certainly the original Star Trek during the 67-68 season, its second season, introduced a mirror universe, which still resonates to this day. This isn't something that people have to grasp. This is what the executives have to grasp is all of these concepts. I'll tell you a very frustrating story for me. I self-published a comic book. Let's see. As a matter of fact, here's the first issue. I self-published a comic book called Living in Infamy. This artwork, by the way, is by John Cassidy. That's the cover. And it was written by Derek Hughes and Ben Rabb, who are TV writers that are now working on CW shows. Well, they're executive producers. The concept of Living in Infamy is about the FBI's witness protection program for supervillains. Supervillains that turn state's evidence are given new identities, and they're basically sequestered away in a town, Infamy, Arizona, which was founded during the Gold Rush era. It's been around for 150 years. Now it's basically a tract home development. It's, like the neighborhoods in Poltergeist and E.T. And a small town. Well, not just small, but, a town like a lot of people have seen. But these supervillains are put in this small town. And there is a character vaguely similar to Captain America named Lieutenant Liberty, who's now retired. And he basically oversees this open-air prison. And he basically captured a lot of our characters. And there's essentially 8 to 10 main characters in this story. And it deals with the lives of these criminals who now have turned state's evidence. And now they're living these sort of bucolic lives. Some of them have kids. Some of them have been there for quite some time. And they're trying to make a life for themselves. And a lot of them have gotten comfortable. Some of them still do contract work for the government, that kind of thing. One of our characters is named Wells Johnson. He's a big black man who teaches at the high school, but his brain also harbors an entity, think, say, Dark Phoenix, but an entity he can communicate with that lives inside his psyche, his mind inside of him, and at any moment threatens to burst through and is an entity like the Dark Phoenix entity that could destroy the world, maybe take it over, you don't know. But Wells Johnson, while he's being a teacher at the local high school, he teaches chemistry, has to deal with the fact that he has this entity inside of him. And he was a villain. Well, we were very close to getting this comic book turned into a TV series. And very, very close. The trigger was about to be pulled. The pilot had been written. There's a feature-length screenplay that was done, and then there was a pilot that Ben and Derek wrote. They're executive producers, but it was a little bit before they were executive producers on CW shows, and it was about 5 years ago, and we were like this close to getting this show made. And one of the executives on this project could not really wrap her head around the character of Wells Johnson. And in a last-ditch effort, they actually were going. I don't want to get into using names or anything, but they're in a last-ditch. And by the way, the pilot script is quite good, and so is the feature. And I thought it was a slam dunk. But then when we started having these conversations, when I was talking to the executive trying to save the project, because I too was a producer on this project, obviously, I was trying to explain. I'm like, well, look, this character was a sticking point for my executive. And she was, I don't understand the character of Wells Johnson at all. I don't understand the idea that there's a cosmic entity inside of him that can burst forth. And you guys are talking about the fact that he would be the big bad in seasons 3 or 4. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, it's like Dark Phoenix. And when we were developing, this was way before the Boys was on TV, I thought that people just understood comic book tropes. Well, what I realized is they didn't, especially those at the executive level in a lot of these places. They didn't read comic books. they necessarily weren't watching comic book movies. So the idea of the Dark Phoenix entity, like if you hadn't watched the X-Men animated series or hadn't read the comic books, it might be quite difficult to understand that Wells Johnson and Umlaut, which is the name of the cosmic entity that was in him, what that was all about. Like, how do you envision that? And when it would manifest itself, I'd be like, like when the Phoenix Force comes out of Jean Grey and she becomes Dark Phoenix. And because in my life, in my world, who didn't know the Dark Phoenix story? I read the Dark Phoenix story when I was a kid. It resonated throughout the Marvel Comics universe. Of course, we saw the less than stellar Dark Phoenix movie, and by the way, that hadn't come out yet. So I just figured everybody knows these things. So when you're talking in a shorthand, well, this was like 5 years ago. We're now 10 years actually 12 years into the MCU. I just thought it was understood. And what I have to realize is it's not. When you're dealing with a lot of these executives, call them gatekeepers, they truly are gatekeepers. They're the people that are holding the gates, and you have to convince them, can I come in and bring my project and make it with you? And these are rarefied gates to get through. When you're talking about these things to people and they don't know what you're talking about, in their mind, well, then this doesn't work. The problem is all of these things can work when you have executives like Kevin Feige, who is already a comic book fan and a Star Trek fan and a Star Wars fan. You don't have to explain any of these things to him, which is why the Marvel Cinematic Universe is successful. Well, when you're trying to make these things with other people, you can't just assume that, everybody lives surrounded by this material that they've been reading since they were kids, in the case of, say, myself. So it doesn't matter what you're talking to me about, even things I don't necessarily... I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of, say, like Doctor Who history. I have a working knowledge of, say, William Hartnell, and I know Tom Baker, and I could probably tell you a lot of things about Doctor Who's history because I've read a lot about Doctor Who, just as a franchise and about the various seasons and how everything works. And that's true of a lot of other things that I don't know much about, but I've read a lot about them. And I think that if I haven't seen them, I probably read about it, and then I'll try and go see it later. But if I was in a conversation with somebody, I'm like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. But I would mean it, and I wouldn't be lying to you. And so that's a problem. Now, our show did not get made. It almost at the 11th hour, and we basically had a blinking green light, but it never turned solid green, and it went away. By the way, to this day, we're still trying to get it made because I think it would be a great show. It's a lot of fun, and it's cool. We kind of thought of it as Breaking Bad meets The Incredibles, if there's a pitch for you. But it was frustrating dealing with executives, and I've had this problem a lot. When you're trying to pitch properties or projects, you have meetings with all these people that are what happens is every production company has a creative development staff of some kind, a creative executive. There are vice presidents, creative executives, and there's all these people that are at various production companies at the studios that listen to your pitches. And what has been frustrating, although that's changed a great deal over the last 15 or 20 years, is there's a lot of people that just weren't necessarily familiar with all of these properties, and why should they be? And especially when you're dealing with people that had Ivy League educations that came out here with business degrees, you can't necessarily expect them to have read every major comic book that was released over the last 30 years. Why would you? So when you're pitching stories like this, when you're trying to explain, when you're speaking in terms of other things, like, it's like the Dark Phoenix Force. When it manifests itself, people will look at you and go, I don't know what that is. And it's like when I go to Comic-Con, I know people that I'm talking to them, they understand the shorthand. But it's really hard when they don't. And what's interesting is a guy like Walter Hamada understands all of this stuff, but you still need people like they're talking about, let's make this slate of projects. We're gonna make these movies. I mean, it's interesting to see Jeff Johns now has a lot of experience, but he started working with Richard Donner and then he wrote a lot of comic books. But being a great comic book writer does not make you a great producer because it's a whole different skill set. So, but it's interesting. He's gone. Jeff Johns has moved into film and done television now. So he's been He's been cutting his teeth there, learning the business, but I'll bet you $1 million he wants to be over across the street doing exactly what his boy Kevin Feige was doing, because they worked together for Donner. And it's sort of an interesting contrast. But then again, Kevin Feige was not a writer. So, when you have now executives that know these things, there is a shorthand. You can go in and explain it to them, and they get it. They're like, yeah, I understand that. But a lot of the time, trying to get these projects made, and the reason why people didn't understand about comic book characters is because they look down on the fact that comic book characters come out of this. They don't come from novels. They came from this. Now that has changed because comic book characters became valuable. But I have to say that up until now, what people never understood is comic book characters or superhero movies are a genre, like stories about lawyers. Now, stories about lawyers, you can do stories like L.A. Law, about a day in the life of a law firm. Or, at the same time, you can tell an amazing character study like The Verdict, starring Paul Newman, one of my favorite movies. The Verdict is really, while the main character is in fact a lawyer, and he is dealing with a lawsuit, one of the great things about The Verdict is it's really the story of a man who has one chance left. Just because he happens to be a lawyer, he could be a race car driver or a pilot or an army colonel. It doesn't matter. The story, it happens to be set within the legal profession, but the story can be a classic tale that you could have put in any genre of story. But what people didn't understand for the longest time about superhero stories is they thought Superman's going to save the world, or something like that. But nobody understood that a superhero story can be any kind of a story. The superhero story that's just a framework. You could tell, I think somebody could make The Verdict in the world of superheroes. Of course, The Boys is a very different look at superheroes than, say, Justice League is. There's a lot more of the real world. I mean, they're both stories about superhero teams, but The Boys is very different than Justice League. And you can see that, yes, on the surface, or if you were going to do a spreadsheet about these kind of stories, one could be very similar to another. But when you start really thinking about what kind of stories are being told there, they're very different. The Boys is not telling a story about a superhero team that goes out and saves the world from global threats. That's not what The Boys is about at all. And it shows that you could say, well, yeah, they're both comic book movies, man. They're about superhero teams. But they couldn't be more different. So if you didn't understand that and you were to just write off The Boys as opposed to the Justice League, you would have lost out. And that would have been sad. And that was frequently my experience when I was trying to get projects off the ground, or even when I was working for companies and pitching things to people. A lot of the time, they wouldn't know what the hell I was talking about. They wouldn't know. They're like, what? I don't understand. And in my mind, it's because that was a failing of me, because I'm so steeped in this that I didn't understand. I needed to come up with a better way to explain stories to people that aren't steeped in all of this material, and sort of distill my pitches or my explanations down to the idea that the people I'm talking to don't get what I'm saying. So I've got to figure out a way. How do I make them understand? And the same is true. Like, for instance, it reminded me of directing. One of the things, you have to talk to an actor when you're directing. And if you want an actor to make adjustments, you have to be able to talk to an actor very clearly and concisely in words and an explanation that they understand. If I were to say, well, it's like how the character acted in this particular obscure film, just assuming the actor's seen every movie that's ever made, well, that's not the best way to talk to an actor. I found that the best way to talk to an actor is to try and equate everything I wanted from them and give it a real world spin, like something that happens to all of us. It's like you felt when your first pet died, all of those emotions. And it's when your first pet died and you're 10, or I would ask the actor, when did your first pet die? And sometimes you get, well, I never had pets as a kid. And then you have to change it up and come up with something else. But if they said, or if he or she said, well, it was like this, well, then you explore that with them and you find out what is it about that particular instance. And is there something that they're telling you that you can say, that's exactly how I want you to play this scene. And that's how you talk to actors. You help them understand what your vision for the scene is, but you have to put it in terms that they can understand, and not only understand, but use. Turn into something that they can then emote and give back to you in a performance that you're looking for. And that's, look, if you're going to direct actors, that is one of the most important skills to have, is to learn how to speak to them on their terms so they understand what it is you're trying to convey. And by the way, they want to understand you. So the same has to be true of when you're talking to people, well, in any profession. You know, you can't expect everybody to understand. And sometimes the way I talk to people can be a little annoying because I want to throw in too much backstory. But that's a fault of my own. And so anyway, when it comes to superhero projects, the real key is to get people that understand that superhero films are a genre, and it's a genre that can be used to tell many, many, many different stories. And you don't necessarily have to just think of them as superhero stories. They're just great stories like any place else. A great story well told, as Stephen King would say. For any story, you need a great character and you need a great story to have that character inhabit. And the real question is, it's not the amount of material that you're making. And as I heard Walter Hamada talk, I know he's smarter than this. He knows that his shows are only as good as his creative team. The problem is, Warner Brothers does not have a Kevin Feige. Doesn't have a Kevin Feige. I've been saying this for years. I've been saying this years before I did this show on Collider Heroes. And that's what is needed more than anything else, to lead a vision for what Warner Brothers is doing. And the fact they need even more of a vision because now they're moving into the multiverse. And so they need a coordinated effort to figure out how that works, because if you're going to buy into the multiverse, that's a really interesting way to go. But that means you can tie all of your projects together and make them all work in a weird synergistic way if you are clever enough. And we'll see. We'll see what happens. And I'm excited. I think Walter Hamada, especially watching him, I think it was DC Fandom was the only time I've ever seen him speak. Very impressive guy. I'm really excited to see where, as a lifelong comic book reader myself, and I've enjoyed comic book movies on the big screen since I saw Superman at the John Dance Cinema in 1978. It's incredible to live in the world that we're in. And as you know, I do love the Avengers. I mean, this is just a fraction of my Avengers Hot Toys figures, but I am a big fan of what the MCU has done. Are all their movies perfect? Certainly not. But I think they do a great, fantastic job, and I never thought I would see the realization of a comic book crossover the way that Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame presented it to me. As a lifelong reader, I was blown away by that, and there's no reason why they can't do it over at Warner Brothers. They just need a group of people that really understand that and that are working on all of these movies. And I'm hoping that the future brings that. Now, by the way, I should have mentioned that this article about Walter Hamada and Warner Brothers was written by Brooks Barnes, and it dropped yesterday in the New York Times. So thanks for that, Brooks Barnes. Now, today in the Hollywood Reporter, Heat Vision, their section that covers comic book movies and things, had this article, Where Wonder Woman 3 Could Go. So following up, this was published at 11 a.m. this afternoon, or this morning, and it's written again by our friend Richard Newby. So thanks, Richard. And here's what he said. Patty Jenkins has said the third installment will be a contemporary story, which leaves open the possibility of seeing Diana Prince stepping into the not-too-distant future. Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman 84, the sequel to her hit 2017 film Wonder Woman, opened in theaters and on HBO Max this weekend. While the rollout was anything but traditional, it created no shortage of controversy within the industry due to its shattering of the theatrical model. Warner Brothers has deemed the film successful enough to fast-track a third film, which will see Jenkins and star Gal Gadot return. Jenkins has previously discussed plans for a third film, though recently said her outline for the film may be subject to change given the events of 2020. Alongside that third film, Jenkins has also discussed a spin-off, The Amazons, which she envisions producing and releasing before Wonder Woman 3, while tying into the events of that film, ultimately creating a 4-film arc. Given Jenkins' recent commitments to Disney as director of Star Wars film Rogue Squadron, a third solo adventure with Diana seems at least 4 years away, though the DCEU won't be left entirely without Wonder. Themyscira, the Amazons, and Wonder Woman will be prominent in Zack Snyder's Justice League, arriving in March 2021, and hopefully the spin-off, The Amazons, which seems like a perfect vehicle for HBO Max, will also be fast-tracked, making the wait for the third film a little easier. But while we wait, we can at least have fun speculating where Jenkins and Gadot might take Wonder Woman next. The setting. In January 2019, when asked about the setting for the third Wonder Woman film, Jenkins told the Hollywood Reporter, "I'm not planning to put it in the past again, because where are you going to go? You have to go forward. It's definitely a contemporary story. That's all I can say. Where we put it and how that gets figured out, I haven't totally nailed down." What's interesting about her statement is that she clearly doesn't say that the film will be set in the present day, the year of whenever the film will be released. The careful choice of words does make me wonder if perhaps Jenkins is planning on stepping into the not-too-distant future. Jenkins has done her war movie, her globe-trotting 80s action movie, and perhaps the next step is into a dystopia or cyberpunk-inspired world. In terms of Wonder Woman 1984, I don't think our society is that far removed from the values of the 1980s, and the message of that film holds just as true for 2020 as it did for 1984. But there's something conceptually fascinating about Diana looking at where we're going if we stay on the path we're on. What happens if Diana can't fulfill her promise to save man's world like she wanted to? That there's certainly a comic book precedent for that question, and recent books like Wonder Woman Dead Earth and DC's upcoming Future State look at Diana's role in a future society. Such a move into the future would also ensure Jenkins the space to work without having to react to the rest of the DCEU, and once again take audiences to places where audiences haven't seen Wonder Woman on screen before, given the character's present-day appearances in Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, and Justice League. Plus, imagine what kind of futuristic Wonder Woman costume Lindy Hemming would have a chance to create, and this step into the future could be even more groundbreaking with the appearance of the right villain. Jenkins has already introduced many of Wonder Woman's most prominent comic book villains: Ares, Dr. Poison, Cheetah, Maxwell Lord, and even an early adversary, Duke of Deception, getting a nod in 1984. But Diana's most powerful nemesis has yet to make her debut: Circe. Based on Homer's character of the same name, DC's Circe is a powerful sorceress and the daughter of the Titans, the forebears of the Greek gods, and a follower of the witch goddess Hecate, who possesses her soul. Her antagonism of Wonder Woman began with her reading of a prophecy that suggested Diana would steal her power and magic. Wonder Woman 1984 already planted the seeds for such a conflict, with Diana telling Steve she's tapped into the magic of the gods, finding a way to turn things invisible. She also learns to fly over the course of the film, so assuming Diana's powers continue to grow over the decade, it would make sense for Hecate, to be alerted to a power stronger than Circe attempting to possess Diana. In the comics, Circe's great act was War of the Gods, a George Perez story in which Circe incited a war between the pantheons of gods that exist within the DC universe, claiming the power of each defeated pantheon for herself. A loose adaptation of War of the Gods, along with elements from the recent Wonder Woman and Justice League Dark story, The Witching Hour, involved Hecate and Circe, could serve as the groundwork for the third film, and for Jenkins to showcase magic and the gods within a slightly futuristic setting sounds like the kind of visual splendor worthy of Wonder Woman's return to the big screen. And since I'm dreaming of the future, it could be fun to enter this future world with an action sequence of Wonder Woman taking down Adriana Anderson, aka Dr. Cyber, whose technology could later be adapted into a new suit of armor, combining both science and magic and giving Diana an edge in her fight against Circe. Now, I thought that was interesting. If you want to read the rest of this article, I'll put it into the live chat, which is right here. So, there you go. Now, my thought, again, with all of this is once, the key, the core to any of these great stories is, again, you have to make the movie about the character. And the question that I have is, unfortunately, I thought Wonder Woman 84's biggest, call it a failing, is that the movie really isn't about Wonder Woman. And Wonder Woman 84, unlike Wonder Woman, the first Wonder Woman, where Wonder Woman is journeying into man's world and discovering it for the first time, Wonder Woman 84 is all Wonder Woman's reactions to things that are happening, for the most part. it's nothing that she is really invested in other than the Steve Trevor angle, and that, of course, is strange, as many people have pointed out. But moving forward, we have to ask ourselves, as with any story, what does this character want? If we're making a Wonder Woman movie, there has to be something fundamental about Wonder Woman herself that drives the story. And that's true of any story. That's true of any kind of great, especially in science fiction, horror, or fantasy. We have to know, well, what is this story about? And the only way we can know that is, well, through the story that our characters are moving through. And with Wonder Woman, I think it's most important, as with any superhero story, we have to have a story like that's based around something our character either is doing or is happening to her directly, or something that she herself or he herself or it itself is invested in. And you really have to know what that is, more so than with superhero stories than ever, because otherwise they just degenerate into the inevitable battle with the villain, the big bad, which at the end of the day, if it's just resolved with some apocalyptic CGI battle over a city or wherever, that's not exactly the most satisfying thing that you could possibly do. And I think that's where the superhero evolution is going to occur, especially on screen. That's why I'm excited about the idea of the multiverse of madness. I'm excited about WandaVision. I'm excited to see where they're going to take these characters from now on, because hopefully wherever they go, they're going to be telling stories the same way you would tell the story about, well, anything. Pick your favorite movie. Jaws, for instance. Where's the superhero version of Jaws? When really it's three isolated people going out to slay a dragon, essentially. Pick any classic tale that you want. And if you, I mean, The Verdict. I could see a movie like The Verdict, I don't know, being the jumping off point of, say, a Captain Marvel movie. Where Captain Marvel, there's something that's deeply personal to her that she gets involved with, and it's a problem. Obviously, it would be not a legal problem, but something along those lines. Something where her powers aren't going to save her, but or save whomever, but her involvement very well might. And I think that if you start thinking of superhero movies not as movies that have to have costumed heroes that end up in doing battle with a costumed villain in the end of the movie, but you start thinking about these films as stories unto themselves, and take, if you want to do, could you do The Devil Wears Prada, which would, you have a very, I don't know, you have a super heroine that is very difficult to deal with, or actually a man or a woman, and you have a young apprentice coming in wanting to please that person and tell that story. You could do that in a superhero context and make it work. The idea that they're going to do a She-Hulk series, and they're going to make She-Hulk a lawyer, and they're going to make it like LA Law with a superheroine. That's a pretty interesting way to go. I would definitely watch that kind of a show. That makes things very, very different and interesting. We haven't seen that before. It can be done. It just requires the right kind of creativity and the right creative team to pull it all off. So anyway, yeah. What do you guys think? Where do you think we should go? What is the future of Wonder Woman going to be? I think whatever that future is, the story has to really pivot on Diana's character, and she has to be the central focus of any movie, as opposed to reacting to what someone else is doing. I think there's got to be more than just, I wish Steve Trevor came back after 70 years. We should be able to do more with that. Anyway, I noticed a lot of people have been firing in Superchats and things, so I figure why not jump over to what you guys are saying first, and let's do that, shall we? And let's do it together. So here we have, to start with, Mike F. says, actually, no, let's go back even further. Let's go to Reese9984. Reese9984. That was actually from yesterday. I don't get Warner Brothers. How do you fuck up these DC movies so bad? Imagine we finally cast the perfect castings, but it sucks that the movies are no good. Well, nobody thinks the movie they're making is bad. I can tell you that right now. Everybody thinks the movie they're making is good, and that's just the way of the world, and so they think they're doing a good job. That's what you have to understand. Like it's again, you'd think it's easy to tell, but it's sometimes really not easy to tell. But yeah, it's making movies. I've always said making movies is kind of alchemy. It's like Rumpelstiltskin spinning straw into gold. You have everything you need. First of all, you got to have a great script. And then you have to have great talent to realize that script. And then, in my mind, if you have a great script, you can always fall back on the script if you ever run into problems. Like, nope, I'm going to fall back on the script. I'm not going to try and overthink it. But making movies is extremely difficult. And another thing is everybody expects, you're going to go out and capture lightning in a bottle. That's not always true. Sometimes you don't understand where a movie's at until you're in the middle of post and you realize this is kind of shite. What can we do to figure it out? So you got to go from there. Mike F. sends in a tip and says, "Hi, Rob. Did you have a chance to have a conversation with Eva Marie Saint on the set of Superman Returns?" Oh, I had many conversations with Eva Marie Saint. Also, besides Shatner, whom you've obviously worked with, have you ever met and talked to the other TOS cast members like Nimoy, Takei, etc.? First of all, yes. Eva Marie Saint, I talked to her at length. For those of you who don't know, I worked on Superman Returns as the documentarian on that movie. I was on set the entire time during production, filming things, and I did make a 3-hour documentary on the making of the movie called Requiem for Krypton, Making Superman Returns, that appears. It's on the Blu-ray of that. Man, I'd love to remaster it in HD, and actually I'd love to recut that whole documentary and make it even better. We were going to do a 6-hour documentary. I don't know what I would do with it, because if I released it online, I would just get a copyright strike against me and they'd block it. But it'd be nice to do it one day. I mean, it's interesting how much material that was created for DVD special features that no one's ever seen. But so Eva Marie Saint was delightful, and talking to her about her career, working with Hitchcock, I mean, it was amazing. She was such a nice woman. And so smart, and had so many stories. And that's one of the things people always say to me, well, Rob, you directed one movie and then, your career didn't amount to much. I'm like, didn't amount to much. I mean, as a documentarian, I got to work on Lord of the Rings, on Chronicles of Narnia, on the X-Men movies, on Superman Returns. I later went on and did 3 years doing Next Generation Star Trek documentaries, where I literally sit down with the entire cast of Next Generation and moderate a discussion with them. Like, as far as the geek kid in me and leading a life of joy, my professional career in this business has been a fanboy's dream. Would I have liked to have been Stanley Kubrick or Steven Spielberg or even John Carpenter or David Cronenberg? Yes, but I'm continuing to work on that aspect, as people know. Beginning in February, a movie I produced, edited, post-supervised, and was the special effects supervisor, the visual effects supervisor, debuts at film festivals around the country starting in February. It'll be playing at least, so far we're in 5 festivals. The movie's called Tango Shalom, and it'll look to Jewish film festivals. If you're interested in seeing the film that I produced, look to your local Jewish film festivals, if you have them, and start looking out for Tango Shalom. But when I get further along, I can tell you more about it. So, yeah. I've been to Nimoy's house. Well, before he passed away, in his house, where what a tremendous guy he is. And Majel Barrett's house. I used to go to Rod Roddenberry's house a lot, the house that Gene built. And I did, but those are Nimoy, Shatner. Of course, I was on an episode of Inglorious Treksperts with Walter Koenig, who I'd never really met and sat down with, but you can listen to that episode. It was very interesting. But those are and I was friendly actually back in the early 90s with Arlene Martell, who played T'Pring. We were working together for a director on a number of different projects. So that's the equivalent of that. So, yeah. Andrea Valentova sends in a super chat and says, "Hi, Rob. Thank you for reading my letter. And also thank you for this awesome show and what you bring to it." Well, Andrea, thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. I will endeavor to constantly do better. Willow Yang is here. Hello, Willow. Willow says, how would you feel about dating a joined trill? If you were in a long-term relationship with one and the host dies prematurely, would you want to resume your relationship with the new host if they're still female? That is a very interesting question. If I was dating a joined trill, obviously what you're getting is the trill. Let's say the trill, you didn't specify how old the symbiote is, but if the symbiote was like, say, had lived 6 lifetimes, both as a male and as a female, and you really got to know the joined species is a combination of the trill symbiote and the host. So the host is also bringing something to the joined experience, and I think together they create a personality that is unique to them. When you remove the host, or you remove the symbiote and put it in a different host, it's not the same person. And while I could try, but I don't know if I would date them because they're not the same entity. They're a different entity. And if, for instance, like if I was, say, Worf or myself and was married to or dating Jadzia Dax, and then Ezri came along, I first of all, I find Nicole DeBoer quite attractive, and as do I find Terry Fail attractive. So as far as that goes, I could hang with them, but they would be a different person. They wouldn't be the same person. So I'd have to get to know that person. It would be great because they would have insight into me. I wouldn't have to explain everything about myself. And if they already liked me, that would be a lot easier. But I think I could date a joined trill if, of course, that new entity cared for me. But it would be really up to them. I wouldn't necessarily have an aversion to doing it. Eric Gant is here. Greetings, O Duke of Dope Discourse. You're A number one. That is an Escape from New York reference. So you're A number one. You're the Duke. Anyway, A number one. Have you seen Greenland yet? No, but my friends, Gary and Edmund Enton, I will say this, my filmmaker friends, Gary and Edmund Enton, we get together. We are Deep Impact fanatics, more so than Armageddon. We'll watch Day After Tomorrow or Geostorm or 2012 or whatever. We will watch any calamitous, when the Earth is threatened, we'll watch it. They told me that Greenland was, in their words, epic. Which leads me to believe, between Gerard Butler starring in it and them telling me it's epic, I can't wait to watch Greenland. I'm all in. Schnip. Is it Schnip? Schnip? Like snicked, but Schnip. I want Ares to come back and overrun Themyscira with demons. Have Diana on horseback leading the Amazons in one last effort to defeat them once and for all. I want a Ride of the Rohirrim moment. That could be cool. I mean, I'm all for that. Why not? That would be a great look. I mean, look, you know what? I want the Atlanteans and the Amazons to go to war like they did in the Flashpoint universe. I think that'd be dope. Can you imagine what would happen to our surface-dwelling world if we found out that the 2 greatest superpowers on this planet we'd never heard of before, and that you had the Amazons and the Atlanteans going to war with one another, and we were caught in the crossfire? I would love that. I think that would be great. Brandon Plummer sends in a super chat and says, "Hey Rob, any ideas when festival movies will start back up on the channel? I know things with YouTube and COVID have been weird. I'm just antsy." Brandon, they start today. Look for a new movie at 6 p.m. and more to come. So yes, and I'll get all the rest out this week. Actually, Glenn Taylor's here. Hello, Glenn. Happy 24th again to you. Rob, do you foresee voodoo magic and invisible X-Wings in Rogue Squadron? One can only wish, right? No, I don't, Glenn. I don't know if one can only wish about that, but I don't see that happening. Stubble McShave is here. Stubble McShave says, it's a bit weird that sci-fi, fantasy, and superhero stories are considered genres unto themselves. A sci-fi or fantasy story can be a comedy, action, thriller, courtroom drama, or romance. And you can have spaceships or dragons. So why wouldn't you? you get no argument from me. One of the great things about Star Trek that I've loved is Star Trek is basically an anthology show with continuing characters. At least it was. If you go back and you look at the original series, you literally can have a courtroom drama like Court Martial, or a half courtroom drama like The Menagerie Part 1 and 2. You can also have like a procedural, Wolf in the Fold, who's killing these women on Argelius. Or you can have a war story with Balance of Terror or Arena. Or you can have a balls-to-the-wall comedy like Trouble with Tribbles, which is a workplace comedy. Or you can have a comedy adventure like a piece of the action. And I think one of the reasons that I loved Star Trek so much as a little kid was the stories were all so different, like The Twilight Zone. And I'm with you. I think that the problem is there's a lot of people who think, oh, man, it's science fiction, so it has to have spaceships and runaway computers and all that. When no, you can do whatever you want. Like, one of my favorite science fiction films of the last 20 years is Her. And the science fiction elements, which, by the way, are terrific, sentient AI, I mean, come on. And it's a story that's a lot more compelling than the second season of Discovery. So I'm with you 100%. Patrick is here. It depends how you think about it. And a lot of people think about the trappings of the genre rather than the stories that can be told. Patrick sends in a tip and says, hi, Rob. With day and date releases now a thing, what do you think of the reaction channels that show snippets of footage and react to it? In general, how safe do you think these types of channels are from copyright strikes? Patrick, a very good question, because in our COVID relief bill, there is a very, very sneaky bill that I guess was stuck in there that's all about cracking down on people and fair use and those kinds of things. Look, in my mind, review channels or anybody that's commenting on something, that falls under fair use, depending on how many clips and for how long you're going to use for. I think people should be protected as far as copyright goes. I mean, you never know. The problem is, here's the thing. If you monetize your channel, which a lot of people do, if you aren't getting material that has been given to you by the copyright holder to use for that specific purpose, it starts to get iffy. It really depends. I mean, I think copyright law is going to be something we all, as YouTube creators, have to look into. Because when I put up a video on my channel, it gets monetized with ads. Unless I don't want to monetize it, but as soon as I monetize it, well, I got something cooking. I got someone else's stuff working for me, and that's maybe not so good. I think what's going to happen is there's got to be a concerted effort made to let creators know. Otherwise, people are going to be in a world of hurt. YouTube's going to be annoyed. Creators are going to be annoyed, and the copyright holders are going to be annoyed. I don't understand. I honestly, I don't understand how people are doing reaction videos to music where they play the entire music video. I don't know how. I guess they're getting around with fair use. I don't know. I'd like to know. La Ligue des Nakamas. Leguay? I know I'm massacring that. What do you think of Cavill's Superman? Personally, I like the fact that we moved away from Donner's version to offer something both more serious and more modern. Ooh, 1 of 6. All right. On the other hand, I hate this Superman on a philosophical level. Is it I think you're saying philosophical level. On the other hand, I hate this Superman on a philosophical level. That Snyder traded characters' optimism for depressing cynicism pissed me off. And what annoys me even more is when we claim that cynicism is synonymous with realism, and therefore that a realistic Superman must be cynical. It doesn't make sense. Superman doesn't have to get depressed to be interesting. 82 years of comics and bad guys to deal with. Audiences will be able to identify with the character the day a director decides to work on Clark Kent's daily life as son, husband, father, citizen, and journalist. No one cares about Superman as a new Jesus or an overly marginal alien. Ooh, that's all very interesting. I don't necessarily think that Zack Snyder's vision I'm a Man of Steel lover. I loved Man of Steel. I also love Superman. I love Justice League. I love all those characters. Here's the thing. I do think that one of the things that I liked about Man of Steel is is it portrayed for the very first time, perhaps, what it would be like if two Kryptonians were actually battling over the skies of a modern American city. It would not be pretty. I mean, the reality is the threat that Superman has to deal with, these extinction level events, people are going to get wasted and die en masse. And like, I hear people criticize, going, "Well, Superman would never let you would never let the man on the street perish." Well, Superman wouldn't have much of a choice when you've got world engines destroying the world on one end, and you've got Zod throwing Superman through buildings on the other. He can't do everything. And really, at first, he's got to preserve his life. Then he has to preserve the life of other people. I think the real problem is, I didn't see it as cynical. As a matter of fact, I saw Man of Steel having some really interesting stuff in it. But for the very first time, they were dealing with the fact that if Superman existed in the real world, what would it be like? And I don't think that's necessarily cynical to deal with what he would have to deal with. But I agree with you. The stories that were told, like, look, I've said this before, and I don't remember who wrote this comic, but I always thought that if I had made a Superman movie, because after I worked on Superman Returns, people would be like, well, how would you open the movie? Because we all know, like, let's say I made a sequel to Man of Steel, or I made a sequel to Superman Returns. I even told Brian this. I told him there's a comic book where Clark Kent, which is obviously Kal-El's costume, it's his persona, Kill Bill style. So Clark Kent, Superman as Clark Kent, takes pride in his work. Like, he likes being a good reporter. So as a reporter, I would think, and also as Superman, there would be things like Superman could never go anywhere and have anybody treat him like, he can't go and sit down with somebody and have a cup of coffee. Like, hey, man, tell me about yourself. That would never happen. So the reason that Superman likes being Clark Kent is he's able to explore human culture. He's able to go interact with mankind where no one is the wiser and they don't know he's Superman. So he can find out everything he needs to know about us clandestinely, so he can not only better understand us, but also find out what's going on. But I think Superman, and nobody's ever really delved into this much, but I think that Superman really likes being Clark Kent and takes pride in his work as Clark Kent. So in this story, Clark Kent, the way I remember it, is that he wants to go to Europe and cover some event. And Perry White's like, well, Kent, if you want to do that, you got to earn it. And so Perry White basically says, and this in the comic, Superman is married to Lois Lane. They're all working together. So in the comic, basically, Perry says, all right, I'm going to give you three stories you have to cover today, and they're mundane. Like, one's a mall opening, and one's, I don't know, a high school football game and something else. So 3 very everyday mundane stories. And Perry's like, you turn all 3 of those stories into me by the end of the day, you get to go to Europe and follow your bliss. You get to go to Europe and cover this thing. Well, so wouldn't it be interesting? Then you see Clark Kent is tasked by Perry White with these things. And as he's going to every story, some calamitous event happens, and he has to leave whatever that a thing is that he's supposed to cover, and save the metropolis from, the toy maker or whatever, some Superman villain or somebody that's doing some kind of shenanigans. So he's unable, over the course of the period of a day, he's unable. So you get to see Superman, you get to see Clark Kent going to these events, but then he has to turn into Superman and save whatever. And at the end of the day, he comes back sort of beaten and demoralized, and Perry is waiting for him, and he thinks, like, because he genuinely is upset that as Clark Kent, he wasn't able to finish this simple task Perry White gave to him because he was saving Metropolis. Now, he really wanted to, as Clark Kent, fulfill this idea. Like, I really wanted to do this, but he couldn't. Well, in the story, what happens is he goes to meet Perry White like at 7 o'clock at night or something. Perry's like waiting for him, and Superman thinks, Clark's like, and Perry's like, great job, Kent. Great job. You get to go to Europe. You get your story. And you find out that Lois Lane knew this and knew that this would probably happen and knew how much it meant to Clark. So Lois went and covered these events and had his back in case this happened. And I'm like, what a great way to open. That would be the first 20 minutes of your Superman story, your Superman movie. Because it's like rescuing Han from Jabba the Hutt at the beginning of Return of the Jedi. It's that kind of a scene where you get to see Superman's real life, and yet how his Superman life always encroaches on his real life as opposed to vice versa. And I always just thought, what a great way to start a movie. You know, it's a Superman story, and you get to show him in action. You get to show like 3 different varying action sequences. Like, I don't know what those action sequences would have been, but it would have been really cool. And yet you would have been able to establish the fact that as Clark Kent, he really wants to do something great. I think that would have been an awesome Superman story to tell. And that's how you open a Superman movie. Like, they can't figure out the reason that it's so hard to come up with a Superman movie is because who does he fight? You know, where's the world-destroying event? But really what we want is we want an exploration of the Superman character. And I always thought that comic, that story, people would love that story. Because if you find out that Clark Kent, that our Superman really wants Clark Kent to be a great reporter. Like, secretly, Superman wants to win a Pulitzer. And he knows that he can't, like, his superpowers aren't going to allow him to win a Pulitzer Prize. He has to be a great reporter. And the thing is, Superman already knows he's superpowered and can, you know, push a nuclear missile into the sun, but he can't write a good story unless he's a good writer. And wouldn't it make sense that Superman would have his own, like dreams of like anybody else? Things that he can't do. Like, we think Superman can do anything. Well, he can't win a Pulitzer unless he's a good writer. And wouldn't it be fun to see that side of Superman too? Because we never see it. He must have it. He doesn't just sit around and wait to save the world all the time. And I was like, well, there's something that in my mind, that's a no-brainer. That's how you open a Superman movie. You know, he wants to do these tasks. You show his Clark Kent persona as he wants Clark Kent to be good. He wants people to recognize Clark as a great reporter because that's sort of his hobby. In a way, his hobby is, and like, you know, it's anybody who's painting or doing horticulture or training dogs to be in best of show, whatever. You know, people take pride in that. And we never see that side in Superman, but I think that's how you could make a cool movie. And to ask your question, I don't know if that, I think that what we were missing in Man of Steel was more of that side of him. Like more of, I don't know, Lois. I mean, Superman, I don't think you even need to make him mild-mannered. You could make him more like the baller reporter he was in The Adventures of Superman with George Reeves. He doesn't have to be like this meek, timid guy. You could go the other direction and make him really distinguished and sort of, I'm Clark Kent. Not that he would speak with a British accent, although Henry Cavill could. But you know what I mean. I think but I think you're right. I think they've missed the balance. Man of Steel, as much as I liked it, I look at it as a science fiction first contact story. If they brought a little bit more into it, more of that His Girl Friday, you know, you go back and you study the rapid patter of the films of the 40s, something like that, and give it a little bit more of that. It could be good. Roy Kirk became a member, creator of Nomad. Emil Johansson is here and says, I think they should have done Mr. America as they did Cavill's Superman. Force him into a controversial situation that people would think demolishes his perfect character. Make the gods bleed. Then I would have liked Civil War. You mean Captain America? Look, I agree. I think that's an interesting way to go, and I think that always works. Is it Legui? La Legui des... I don't know. Nakamas. I feel so terrible. I'm massacring your name. By the way, do you know Riot? He's a villain able to create an incredible number of clones and to adhere to the walls. Plus, inflicting damage on one of his clones just creates other clones. Imagine that this enemy is adapted to the cinema as a terrorist who aims to kill Lex Luthor. Clark would be placed in a situation where he'd have to choose between letting Lex die to save citizens or protecting Lex and taking the risk of letting citizens die. I think those kinds of stories are the best kind of stories to deal with when you're dealing with Superman. You know, you have to, Superman, by giving him a moral choice, the lesser of two evils, it's always going to be really interesting and how that's going to work and how Superman's going to deal with that. Very much compelling stories. I'm with you there. I think that's a really great idea. By the way, thank you very much for supporting the channel in the manner you have by asking your questions. That's very nice of you. Thank you so much. Jeff Yerke sends in a tip. Mr. Jeff, how you doing? Hi, Rob. Season's greetings from sunny Northern California. Question, why did Bryan Singer's Superman Returns not take off? Mrs. Y and I really liked it, and we're bummed Singer's Superman did not fly. Look, obviously, I'm in Superman Returns. You can actually see me for about a split second. I have lines, though. You can hear my dialogue. I am the NASA reporter when Jimmy and Clark go into the bar right before the disaster with the space shuttle. You can hear me on the screen, and I'm in focus for about one frame when you see me on the TV screen. But Ross Campbell is my name in that movie. I'm in the end credits as an actor, NASA reporter. That's me. I love Superman Returns. The problem is it's not the Superman movie that people wanted to see. You know, the deadbeat dad aspect. And I really thought that there was a better movie in that. The version of the movie that I saw before, Bryan doesn't test screen his movies, but he does have what he calls friends and family screenings, where he did 2 screenings of Superman Returns, the 3-hour version of it. I mean, Cal Penn had dialogue, and there was a lot more going on. You saw the Return to Krypton sequence that you can now get as a deleted scene, or see it on YouTube, I guess. And it was a different movie. I mean, not such a different movie, but it felt different. And I thought what they were attempting, the idea of Superman finding more of those real world responsibilities, like what it was like to be a father. And, you see Richard White, who's sort of the human equivalent of Superman. He's a good man who flies, albeit in a seaplane. But I think that Superman Returns is a better movie than people give it credit for. But it's just at the time, it was kind of, not only is he kind of creepy, a deadbeat dad and all those things, but he doesn't really do anything at the end. I mean, yeah, he saves the world. He has to lift a rock. He just lifts a rock. But it was more of a character study. I just think it wasn't as entirely successful as they wanted it to be. And I think people wanted to see some big battle at the end, and there isn't. I mean, there's no villains in there that he can fight. And I think that was sort of the fatal flaw, that the biggest, most exciting Superman moment comes in the beginning of the film when he saves the jet. And when you have your big action set piece that everyone loves, the most Superman of all Superman action set pieces, and it's in the first 20 minutes of the movie, it can be problematic. And there's nothing that reaches those heights. So unfortunately, it's yeah. But I like it too. I mean, I will always love it. I was there the entire time during production. I have such fond memories of that time in my life. It was so much fun to live in Australia for a year and work on that film. My God. Do I have stories? Oof, it was fun. Sister Harrow is here, and thank you for sending in a super chat, Sister Harrow. What is it with Hollywood? I've caught a few Asian movies and series, and those guys are kicking it. Their styles are different, but they're a lot better than some of the Western filmmakers of late. You know what I think it is? I think that some of the great Asian filmmakers understand how to combine melodrama, like high melodrama, with fantasy. And when I say fantasy, I mean science fiction, magic. They only because, there's in America, at least when I was growing up, not so much now, people sort of frowned upon science fiction, fantasy, and horror. It was lesser of genres. Even comic books. The comic books in Japan and in a lot of European countries, France, Spain, a lot of the great artists, the comic artists that were coming out of Europe, they didn't so much frown upon graphic storytelling. And in Japan, manga, I mean, they have manga about housewives, golfers. I mean, the Japanese would make manga about everything. And I would imagine, I don't know much about Korean and Chinese comics, but I'm sure it spills over that they didn't look down. Like you'd go onto a train in Japan and people would be reading like Shonen Jump or whatever. They would have these big compilation mangas but here in America, comic books were disposable. We didn't have that tradition of graphic storytelling. And so my point is that I think in Asian countries they have more of a grasp of intertwining because of, think about all the legends and the stories. They can intertwine the everyday with the fantastical, and you don't have most people going, ugh, it was just a different mindset. And I think like I've loved to say this about like when J horror became big, and you had movies like Ju-on or Ringu coming to America. The idea that the Japanese know or in Asian cultures know, your ancestors are watching you. Like, you better honor your ancestors. Like, go to the temple or whatever. Because if you don't, and some curse has been put on a house or something bad happens, you can't get away from it. Like, it's still there. And so there was a much more accepting, like in Europe, there were fairies and folklore and all that was much older. Like here in America, our myths were like the Old West. Maybe if somebody like Lovecraft or something and Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein and all that, but we didn't have that. We didn't have that in our culture. So flights of fantasy and real life, I think, were much more separated. And this is just a personal theory. I could be wrong, but much more separated in America. Like we didn't build in flights of fancy the way they did in, say, Asian countries. And I think, like, when you watch, that's why I like John Woo movies. When I first started seeing things like Better Tomorrow and The Killer and then Hard Boiled, there was so melodramatic. Like the story of Tequila, Chow Yun-Fat's Tequila and Hard Boiled. It's melodramatic, but at the same time, like kick ass. The gunfights, all that stuff was awesome. And like you're watching this and you buy into the melodrama. I mean, literally at work, you've got the assistant and the police captain, and then you've got Tequila, and he's flirting with the girl. I mean, it is barely above a sitcom. It's that kind of flirtation, but at the same time, you're dealing with cops undercover, like Tony Leung, and the weight of the world is on him, and it all meshes together in a really interesting, frothy mix. And this is a hardcore action movie. Like, this would never fly in America, but when you're watching these movies, it works. Like, it works. And I think that goes all the way down to the wuxia movies and stuff, and it comes out of the genre of it all. And I think that, it's just different cultures have a better handle on things. That's why I think that, we always loved, the reason that J-horror became really popular is because I think we all like ghost stories. But the great thing about the Japanese J-horror is like they were able to suddenly start making ghost stories in the modern day. And you'd buy off on it. They could make that shit scary as hell. Where in America, it's like ghosts weren't like, you'd watch The Changeling back in 79, 80, but ghost stories in America didn't really fly. When did they fly? If you go back and you ask yourself when, and I've got a ground zero for the modern, now everything is a ghost story. There's spirits. When I think it really took off, there were two things. Well, really one, and it was genius. The first Paranormal Activity movie. Because the genius conceit of the first Paranormal Activity movie is like, we grew up, Americans, every American kid, there's a monster in my closet. There's a monster under my bed. Well, I don't know whoever thought of this, but putting a video camera on in your bedroom to shoot your bedroom while you were asleep, and in the middle of the night, having your closet door go and close, that's the scariest shit ever. Like, every single person who watches that's like, oh my God, and boom, Americans are into ghosts again. I mean, yeah. Anyway, where was I? What was the question? Let's see. So Sister Harrow, that's kind of where, I guess that was a pretty good answer, right? I guess. Echo Base Network, I love you guys. We tried to get our documentary into some film festivals, but then the beer bug hit. You should 100% be proud of what you've done in your career. I keep trying with your documentary, by the way. Don't give up. I mean, John's documentary went to, I told John Campy, I said, hey man, you should spend the next 6 months sending your movie to festivals. Why not? But he really wanted to get it out to the fans, and I totally appreciate that. But I love working on that documentary, so keep trying. And don't get me wrong, I am very proud of what I have done in my career. That's what a lot of people, you can't insult me by going, oh, aren't you afraid? Aren't you bummed out your career hasn't amounted to what you wanted it to amount to? And I'm like, well, compared to what? Like, yes, I would love to have been Stanley Kubrick or Steven Spielberg. I would have. But you know what? I was also a fanboy that I loved this stuff. And I got to the only movie I've directed was with my childhood idol. Now, would I like to get a definitive version of that movie out on Blu-ray and then a 4K? Yes. To that goal, I just don't own my movie. I'm trying to get my movie, but I don't own it, so I can't. But my first when I made, here's something I think people don't understand. Like when I made Free Enterprise, when it came out, we won some festival awards, and I got to go to the Sitges Film Festival in Spain, which I'd wanted to go to. Sitges is as old as I am, so I had known about the Sitges Festival. Alvoriaz and Sitges were these two festivals that I really wanted to go to. It's a film festival that's only science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And we sent it to Sitges, and the world premiere of Free Enterprise was at the Sitges Film Festival outside of Barcelona, Spain. This is a place I'd wanted to go to my whole life. And here is a movie I made with William Shatner, Star Trek fan that I am. I got to go to Sitges, and then we sold our movie at the Cannes Film Market. So I went to France. I went to Cannes with William Shatner. Like, if that was all I ever did in my career, I'm like, well, I did that. As a kid, I was able to make that movie. But since then I went and worked on, even though in a documentary capacity, working on the Lord of the Rings movies, hanging out in New Zealand for months at a time. Do you know what happened to me in New Zealand? Here's what happened to me in New Zealand. This is a true story. I had taken a copy of Free Enterprise with me to New Zealand. And I had loaned it to Rick Porras, who was one of the producers, I think co-producer. He had it, and he was in Auckland. Now, I'm working on we're doing interviews every day with cast and crew and all that for Lord of the Rings. I get a phone call from Peter Jackson's assistant, and she says, and I have to explain, like, when I go do a job, I don't walk in and go, hi, here, I'm Rob Burnett, and I've done these things. You don't tell anybody what you've done. You walk in and you're like, okay, what's the project? What are we doing? Very excited, very excited. Let's go work on that project. You don't tell anybody what you're doing. As a matter of fact, I don't want anyone to know anything else I've done because I just want to concentrate on whatever project that I've been hired to do at the time. So I don't know where I was. I get a phone call from Peter Jackson's assistant. And she says, are you this Rob Burnett who made Free Enterprise? And you have to understand, we were down there in 2001, 2002. And Free Enterprise had come out a year before, and it came out in summer of 99, year and a half, 2 years before, and it hadn't gone to New Zealand. So I'm like, yep, I'm that guy. And she says, well, Peter Jackson wants you to show your movie in the movie theater, in the Weta Theater. And where Weta Digital is, so there Weta Digital and was like here, and the offices were here, and you come around the corner down the street, and then there was a corner building, and then there was the Weta workshop. So it was like just say it's the Weta neighborhood. And at the corner was this where the movie theater was. And it's a movie theater. It was like almost stadium seatings, and it's a movie theater. So the assistant's like, yeah, so tonight, can you show it at like 8? Why didn't he my copy, I'm in Wellington, it's in Auckland. So I called up Rick Porras. I'm like, bruh, is there some way somebody can drive this down? And they put it on a plane. Like somebody went and took my Free Enterprise DVD and flew it down. And so I bring it to a theater, and there I went in this theater. There's all these people that worked on Lord of the Rings. They're there in the theater. Peter Jackson was not there, though. But I was in his house later, so it was fine. I saw Return of the King for the first time in his house. So I'm in this theater, and I have to like speak, and it was so funny because I was sitting, Alan Lee, the amazing Tolkien illustrator, was sitting right behind me, and he kind of had one of his teeth was a little crooked, so sometimes when he would speak, a little whistle would come out of his mouth, which I thought was great. You can see him on the documentaries. He was sitting behind me, and as Free Enterprise was playing, he was laughing his ass off the whole time. Alan Lee. And I was just sitting there. I'm like, this is the coolest shit ever. Like, Alan Lee is laughing. And I'm like, Alan Lee, I'd seen his work before. And now, we're interviewing him. It was amazing. It was just amazing. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, here I am in Wellington, New Zealand, in the Weta Theater, showing my movie at the behest of Peter Jackson, and I have one of the great Tolkien illustrators sitting literally right on my shoulder, laughing his ass off at my movie. And I'm thinking, well, I don't have to do anything more. I mean, as fanboy that I am, I'm like, what more do you want me to do? I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I don't know. I guess I'll go to Weta Digital tomorrow and just interview the people I'm supposed to interview. It's just like, so yes, I can't complain. I can't complain about much. I'm proud of what I've done. Would I like to do more? Yes, and I still plan on doing more. Even though I've done a small part. Again, I say it again. I worked on an animated Netflix series that drops in March, and you will find out about it. They'll announce it, what it is, and there'll be a trailer in February. And Tango Shalom, a movie that I produced, I edited. I was the post-production supervisor and the visual effects supervisor, will be at a Jewish film festival soon near you. So there you go. Kevin, the comic doctor. Hello, Kevin. One day I'm going to send you a package of comics. By the way, I'd love to get my own comics graded. I'll send you a stack too. Kevin says, hi, Rob. Wonder Woman was aggravating. So much nonsense going on. What about the fight at the White House? Her powers are gone. How does she and Creepy Steve get out of there? Don't directors review their scripts to catch problems? Man, there were lots. I have to tell you, to be honest, I found the script of Wonder Woman to be baffling. I really did. Like, how did that get made? I don't know how that got out of the script phase. I really don't know. Because I as a development executive, and I used to be one, I would have read that script and I'd been like, I have questions. You know? And also, when I worked at Warner Brothers, after lunch, and I worked in feature production, so we were... After lunch, all of the executives. Now, how it worked at the studio was that there was two divisions. For me, the two divisions that were really important. There was the main division that ran the studio, and at the time I was there, it was Bob Daly and Terry Semmel ran the studio. Then there was Bruce Berman and Mark Canton were right below them, and then there were people like Alan Stewart and Lucy Fisher and Lisa Henson, Bob Brassel, Tom LaSalle, Billy Gerber, and they were running the studio. They were the people that ran the studio. So they were the people that decided what movies Warner Brothers was going to make. And that we were the feature production department. My boss, Bill Young, oversaw the physical production of all the movies. And after lunch every day, meaning people usually would go to lunch from 1 to 2, but at 2 o'clock or 2:30, from 2:30 or whatever, there was usually a 2 or 3 hour block of time where the executives from both departments would go watch the dailies of all the movies that Warner Brothers had in production. And that was something you could do, but they ran dailies. Now I'm sure it's done all online, obviously, but it was done. You'd go to a screening room and you'd sit down and watch the dailies, and that dailies are the material that was shot the day before, and all the movies Warner Brothers was making, and they played the dailies. And there were the executives from both sides, both the main executives that decided what movies were being made. They each covered. There was like 5 of them that were assigned to the different movies. Like they each might be overseeing 5 or 6 movies, and then my executive production managers, they each were covering films. So there were 3 executives under Bill, and they would go, and they would have to watch, and they would see every single day. So if there was a problem of some kind, they would know. And they could see as the movies that were being made, as they were developing and all that. I don't know if that still goes on. I'm sure it must, but I don't know. I don't know if today's executive will sit down 5 days a week and watch 3 hours of dailies. I don't know if they do that anymore. I have no idea. I would imagine they probably should. So there's no surprises when they're making films. When they get the movies done, it's like, well, then this should be okay, right? But it's hard. Like, it's really difficult when you're making movies to see them all come together. Like, is this going to work? But, Kevin, I think all of us, I think everybody, what's really interesting is everybody wants to love Wonder Woman. I did. Everybody wants to love it. And we're all perplexed. We're like, how did this happen? This movie's goofy. It's all over the place. It's a balls to the wall fantasy film. When people would say, like, even Patty Jenkins has said, well, you know, the reason we went back to the 80s is it was a seminal time in Wonder Woman history. Well, yeah, George Perez's Wonder Woman that he wrote, he finally started to write. He was writing and drawing Wonder Woman, became one of the great runs on the character ever. And he really leaned into mythology and everything. And that was the post-crisis reinvention of Wonder Woman. It was terrific. If you want to read a great series of comics, get the omnibuses of Wonder Woman that George Perez did. Fucking dope. That shit was great. And I think everyone's wondering, like, how did they make this movie? Like, after Wonder Woman 1, how do we get a movie that's like, we didn't want an 80s movie. What we wanted was an updated version of what you would, I don't understand. I don't know. Michael Rhine. Is it Rhine? Rob, I love listening to the show every day, especially when you break into your antagonist voice. Laugh out loud. Some people don't like that. Someone said, they don't like it when I talk like this or whatever. I try and do it a little different every time. Okay, my question. Besides your incredible collection of figures and models, do you ever collect screen-use props? Thanks. Ooh, that's a good question. No. I'll tell you something. And this is going to seem really weird. Now, a lot of people know that I worked on the Axonar project, and Alec Peters is a big prop dealer. And I've been around. I've seen a lot of incredible movie props. I never had any interest in collecting movie props because movie props are not, they're not real. And they're usually cheap. And there's people that are fanatical collectors, and I don't begrudge them that. But like, for instance, I don't know if let me show you something. So behind me here, there's a company called Master Replicas that made, there's a tricorder, a phaser, and a communicator from the original series. And they're manufactured as if these are real things, like from the real Star Trek universe. So they're metal, they're heavy, they work, they got dials, they light up, they make the sounds. The phaser has, the phaser 2 has, so when you pick it up and you put it in your hand, you feel like this is actually from the 23rd century. And if this makes any sense at all, unless I would love to have collected, and I've held them in my hands, like the model that Greg Jean made of the Enterprise, the 3-foot model for Trials and Tribulations, or pardon me, the 6-foot model for Trials and Tribulations or whatever. Like, I want that. I want something that can fire my imagination and it feels like it's in universe. And I think that came from when I got the Franz Josef Star Trek, the technical manual, the Starfleet technical manual. When I got the Starfleet technical manual when it came out in 1975, I was like 8 or something. But the conceit of that is that this really did come from the 23rd century. And I'm like, oh my God, it felt real. I've never picked up a movie prop that I picked up and went, wow, this makes me really believe that this came from the 23rd century or wherever it came from, because they're props. You know, some props are really good. But for the most part, I think it's neat. Like, oh yeah, that's cool. I like seeing costumes and all that, but I never got into it. It doesn't work with my imagination. What I love, I love, like, you get a great looking hot toy figure, and I can imagine, like, this is so great. This figure is so awesome. Here is the hot toy figure of Doctor Strange. Okay, this is why I love these figures so much. I've been collecting figures my whole life, and when I was a kid, I always complained that they were never as good. The figures were never very good. Now, look at his cape. Okay? Look at the stitching and the work on this is the back of his cape. Now, I have him set up right now. I have him posed so he's casting spells. And it's kind of goofy. Like, normally I don't like this. I don't like these weird things. Like, here's a plastic representation of a spell that he's casting. But, like, if you look at the face sculpt and all this stuff, these figures and look at the detailing of the costumes and the Eye of Agamotto and like all this stuff. And then they do things like with this Doctor Strange figure, his cape is fixated with a magnet so there's a magnet in there. So first of all, his cape can come off because his cape can function without him. But just again, his eye of Agamotto. If you look at this stuff, these figures are such great representations of these characters. And the reason, I, for whatever reason, never got rid of my fascination when I was a kid growing up for these characters. I love action figures. Even the way they have the metal work, how the metal can just, like the real cape in the show. These figures are so good. And when I was a kid, I was never the figures never looked right. Their costumes weren't right. But I love these figures because in my imagination, he feels real to me. so while it would be awesome to own Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange costume, I could put it on a mannequin or something. But I would much rather have a badass Hot Toy figure that I look at because first it tickles my inner child, but secondly I'm like, this is such an awesome representation of this character. And then you could this is hardly some kind of a definitive. I just put these here because I'm moving them into a glass case over there, and I've got to get around to doing that. I haven't yet, but so I had to put them someplace rather than keep in a box. So I will get all of my Avengers. I will have my Avengers assembled again, but that it kind of feeds into I don't know. I need to have something I believe in my imagination. To make a long story short, Michael, now everyone's going, who is this maniac? Anyway, Evan Newman says, Rob, if your directing career gets rolling again, do you think you would only direct feature films, or could you see yourself making feature documentaries too, given your documentary background, basically what Werner Herzog has done over his career? Oh, no. I love making documentaries. I made documentaries about movies for 20 years. And I made, this year, I made documentaries on The Hills Run Red, a movie I produced. You can go, if you go look on the Burnettwork on this YouTube channel, you can go down and see the interviews that I did. I did put two of the pieces I did for documentary pieces. Watch the William Sadler, who plays the Grim Reaper in the Bill and Ted movies, and he was in, of course, a million other things. He was the villain. He was Colonel Stewart in Die Hard 2. You can go watch that, and you can kind of see my style of filmmaking documentaries if you've never seen my DVD stuff. But go watch that Bill Sadler piece that's on my channel. But I would love to go back and make documentaries. My friend Carrie David, who I work with, she and I were producers on Agent Cody Banks. We actually bought that script and developed it. And sold it to MGM. She is now making documentaries. She made a documentary this year called Breaking Their Silence, Women on the Front Lines of the Poaching War, about female park rangers in Africa protecting big game. So I love making documentaries. So I would absolutely do that. Matthew Garrett says, what are your thoughts on two Batmans and who will ultimately play the second after Keaton Affleck in The Flash? Good question. I don't know. That's a good question. I love the idea. Ben Affleck and Michael Keaton, again, if we have a great script, having those two guys get together, I love this idea. I love alternate universe stories when they are done well. And I like the Flashpoint comic series. I like what they did with that. I even like the animated Flashpoint Paradox movie that DC, that Warner Premiere made. I thought it was pretty good. So I'm looking forward to that a lot. I don't know who's going to play the second Batman after. I don't know. That would be that Thomas Wayne. I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I can't think in those terms. It's really hard for me to come up with an actor who could play the Batman. I can't see that. Richard Ford sends in a tip and says, I caught up on the Inglorious Trexperts podcast while doing a long-distance drive today and was pleasantly surprised they've invited you there again. Yes, which is good. Enjoyed your comments about Captain Scarlet to UFO to Space 1999 being a continuum. Also, great episode with David Mack. I'm a huge David Mack fan. David Mack is a novelist. He also is currently, I believe he's consulting on Prodigy, the new Star Trek series. David Mack's one of my favorite Star Trek writers. I think he took up the mantle where Peter David left off. If you're a Star Trek fan at all, his duology on the Mirror Universe, his Star Trek Destiny series, He did a trilogy about the Sung androids, Data being a Sung android, and Lore and their mother, and really, really good stuff. I'm glad you enjoyed that, and yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed. I'm glad to be back. I wouldn't have liked to have been canceled from that, which is kind of a bummer. Brendan Sheehy says, I rewatched Minority Report, and wow, it still holds up well. I really like Minority Report. Fantastic concept coupled with some of Spielberg's best direction. I agree. Production design is incredibly slick. Tom Cruise gives a great grief-stricken performance, and the scene with the spiders is aces. Yeah, I think I would love to see Steven Spielberg and Tom Cruise collaborate again and make another film. I loved Minority Report. You know, the end, it's still a thriller. So, yeah, I think it's good, but I'm glad you liked it. It's great. I hope La Lagune de Nakamas, once again, I'm butchering your name. We have a difference in interpretation of Superman. For me, Clark Kent is not a disguise. He grew up in Smallville with his parents and had the same life as anyone. Let me go on to say he can be more shy with people who do not know his secret, but he is not schizophrenic like Bruce. And you go on to say, the Lois and Clark TV show is cheesy and full of flaws, but they had the right approach to Superman-Clark duality. Clark is the main personality. Superman is just the best Clark has to offer the world around him. Clark becomes Superman thanks to the Kents, not Jor-El. Come on, Rob. Parasite, Metallo, Darkseid, The New Gods, Brainiac, Major Force, Livewire, Riot, Bizarro, and Other Dimensions, Superman and Justice League, Mongol on Another Planet, a great rogues gallery. Listen, I don't disagree with anything that you've said, but the problem is, how do you make that into a movie that audiences that are used to seeing? I mean, look, you could bring in Mongol now. People would believe Mongol, and because of people like Thanos, it could be done. But could you do Bizarro? I mean, you could, but it would depend. Brainiac you could do, depending on how you want to do it. Major Force, sure. Of course, Darkseid, The New Gods, which hopefully we're going to get. I think all of that is great, but the thing is, how do you then make it into a compelling story? Okay, so you're going to have Mongol. You know, I love, what do you get for the man who has everything? You know, the idea that the great story where Mongol puts, that Alan Moore wrote, where Mongol put the thing where Superman is living a life basically the inner light story of the Superman mythos. I mean, you could definitely do something like that. I think it'd be great, but it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do because all of those characters, they are, again, it's the same reason that it's hard to bring someone like Cheetah to life, as opposed to, say, showing Wonder Woman in World War I, where snipers are going after her and she's running through a burnt-out city with her shield up and tracer bullets hitting. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to do. It's really hard to do. John Orchard became a member of the channel. Well, thank you. Alexander Wilson became a member of the channel. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Alexander. Ox Media Broadcast became a member. Well, thank you. Evan Newman sends in a tip and says, Man of Steel 2 idea. Superman versus a body snatcher thing invasion. Begin with Clark working on a back-page story about people acting strangely. He realizes an invasion is on and needs to discover how to stop it, but he doesn't know who to trust, including JLA members. Yeah, why not make that Starro? You know, you don't necessarily have to put Starfish over everyone's faces, but you could make it Starro. And then La Lagune says, throughout a saga, we can even introduce the fact that Superman gets stronger and stronger from film to film in order to adapt his powers to growing threats. No, I agree. All of these are good ideas. The question is, how do you turn them into a movie that audiences of today will buy into? I mean, look, I look at things like Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, and the Justice League Animated Series. To me, those three animated shows should be the jumping off point for all live action DC superhero material, because they've done it. But it's just, it's hard, man. It's hard. Stubble McShave says, according to the IMDb, the Wonder Woman 84 story came from Jeff Johns. He and Dave Callahan are listed as those writing the screenplay. Apparently, Jenkins was involved in the story, but she wasn't credited for writing on IMDb when you look under writing credits. But I think she is credited on the film. Well, yeah, shame on them. Shame. I don't know what to say. But yeah, I think Patty Jenkins does get credit. Let's see. I think I've got a few. I think I have a few letters from you. Let's see. What did everybody have to say today? Lot of letters from other people. This one comes Hasan Chavez, our friend Hasan Chavez. I always feel like he's gonna rake me over the coals. Hola, Elizabeth and Robert. I wanted to write in defense of Wonder Woman 84, but it would be pointless considering the American fandom already decided this film is garbage. I think Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and Thor Ragnarok are far worse films because they don't appeal to worldwide audiences, but who cares? A movie is good as long as it makes Americans happy. I saw Wonder Woman 84 11 days ago, and the comments online were mostly fine. I liked it, but I knew it was dumb, just like any other 80s movie. That decade gave us a ghost giving a blowjob to a Ghostbuster and a young mom flirting with her son from the future. Come on, those are all great. I believe Patty Jenkins made this movie the way it is because that's what powerful directors do, don't they? I didn't want to bring gender issues here, but it's obvious that women can't have fun with their mistakes. Now people want Patty out of DC and Star Wars. Some pundits say her mediocrity was rewarded with the announcement of a third movie, but guys like Christopher Nolan can fuck up big time, and yet people prefer to just not talk about it. I'm not sure if reversing that episode of whining was the right thing to do. Why do you think some bad movies work and others don't? What makes astute viewers like yourselves enjoy terrible stuff like Aquaman, Godzilla, King of the Monsters, I like this one a lot, or A Good Woman is Hard to Find? Do you think A Good Woman is Hard to Find is a terrible movie? I carefully wish you a happy new year. Good question, Hasan. First of all, okay, I would say this. Like, when you blanket, when everyone says that movie sucked, I hate that. Like, I can spend an hour telling you why I liked or disliked a movie. And I think that with Aquaman, I look at Aquaman and I think to myself, that movie, if you like a modern take on superheroes, like the MCU and what Zack Snyder was doing when he introduced the Aquaman character briefly, or what he wanted to do in Justice League, what he shot in Justice League, and you watch the Aquaman movie, to me, I have to tell you, when I sat down and watched Aquaman, I was with John Campea. We watched it in IMAX at Universal, and I was astonished by what I was watching. I was astonished because it went full-on epic fantasy. I mean, it embraced. I couldn't believe it. Like but I had so much. That movie, the same way I still love action figures, I loved Aquaman as a middle-aged man with one foot in the grave. I loved Aquaman the way I would love a Ray Harryhausen. When I saw those Ray Harryhausen stop-motion skeletons fight at the end of Jason and the Argonauts, I don't know, I was probably 7 or 6 the first time I saw that shit. I couldn't believe it. I thought this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. You know, there's stop-motion skeletons fighting the Argonauts. I mean, Jason and the Golden Fleece. I love this. And I felt that when I was watching Aquaman, I was watching a filmmaker in James Wan who was influenced by all the things that I loved when I was a kid, whether it was Jerry Anderson with miniatures and Jason the Argonauts and stop-motion animation. And he just leaned into the fantasy nature of the Aquaman character. And I loved it. I know that there's a lot of people who just tuned out. You know, they wanted a much more realistic portrayal of what Aquaman would be. But I'm like, yeah, but the character of Aquaman, you know, rides a giant seahorse and talks to fish. So how do you reconcile those things? And then by the time you're that great chase sequence over the rooftops when Black Manta's men, you know, they're it's not Black Manta then, is it? But they're blasting the rooftops, you know, and they're running across. I love that. I loved it. So I wouldn't say And I love, look, here's what I don't understand. I don't understand the hate for Godzilla King of the Monsters, Mike Dougherty's movie. Another movie that I loved because it was clear to me that I grew up watching Godzilla movies. I've seen them all. I own them all. And I think that people who, the people that rejected Godzilla King of the Monsters did not. They clearly, in my mind, haven't seen the Godzilla movies, or they've only seen modern Godzilla movies, which makes sense because even Roland Emmerich's Godzilla movie came out in what, 98? So, and if you, a lot of people, they just don't watch those movies. Like I loved starting in the era of films after the Showa era. You had not the, between the high is it high C era, the high C era, high C era, is that you pronounce it? Like Godzilla versus Mothra, man, I cried in that movie. What was that, 92? And then King Ghidorah coming back, and Mecha King Ghidorah, and Godzilla GMK. I love this shit. I loved it. So when I saw Godzilla King of the Monsters, I'm watching it for what it's supposed to be, and how does it fit in with the entire rest of the pantheon of the Godzilla movies. So I know that there was a lot of people that just, they're not down with that stuff because it embraced, there's a lot of goofy stuff that goes into a Godzilla movie, and then when they bring it to America, they make it more realistic. So it's like, I love Kong Skull Island too. And so I mean, I would at least like to think that when I like something, it's based on, especially when it's like a Godzilla movie, it comes out of a lifelong love of those films. And I don't think a lot of people have gone back and watched the original the Showa era of Godzilla goes from, what is it, 55 to 74 with Terror of Mechagodzilla? Is that right? I think 55 to 74, 54 to, I think it's 54, 55 to 70. When is it? You know what? Let's find out, shall we? What was the actual release date? Original. 1954. So it's the Showa era is 1954 to 1974. So it's 20 years. And I grew up watching those movies. Like Rodan, which is still my favorite of all the kaiju films. Rodan's my favorite because Rodan worked like a horror movie and a kaiju film, and I thought it was great. But anyway, what was I saying? Now, what makes me like these movies? I try and bring an astute. I don't know why. Did you not like A Good Woman Is Hard to Find? I mean, I thought for, again, what that movie is, the authorship behind that movie, I thought they did a terrific job with that film. And again, I try and look at films, always look at films as to what about their authorship. What did they intend to make? And did they succeed? And I think when you're making a Godzilla movie, if you look at the Godzilla films, I think nowadays people look at Godzilla and they expect it to be like a variation of Jurassic Park. I was surprised when Pacific Rim, I saw Pacific Rim, and when I went bananas for it. I thought I saw it like 4 months before it came out at a special screening. Guillermo del Toro was there. It was a recruited audience. I got taken there by a friend of mine. We weren't supposed to be there because we were in the entertainment business. I was with Derek Hughes, who wrote this comic. He got me in. It was like being at a Prince concert where I couldn't stop screaming. That was what it was like being in that theater. And it was like the greatest thing ever. I thought Pacific Rim, I thought everybody in America would love it, but people are like, oh, it's like Top Gun with monsters. I'm like, yes, it is. It's exactly what it was the greatest thing I ever saw. A lot of people didn't like it. That reminds me, for no other reason, I don't even know why I'm remembering this right now, but it is Emma Bannon's birthday today. I guess if she's living in England and it's I guess it wouldn't be her birthday because it would be past midnight, but our own Emma Bannon, I want to wish her a very happy birthday if she gets to this part of the show. Happy birthday, Emma. Happy birthday to you. I'm not going to ask how old you are. You never ask a woman that. So I won't. And I don't know. But I hope you had a great birthday. This one comes from Mike F. Hi, Rob and the Post-Geek Singularity. Thank you for reading my letters regarding the new Filipino film Fangirl and my discussions on Kurtzman and Goldsman. I love your responses on those. I'll never get tired of watching you discuss modern Star Trek because I think there really needs to be a discourse about those until somebody in Viacom CBS finally make a smart decision on how Star Trek should be handled. Anyways, in this letter, I will follow up on your response in my letter discussing Fangirl and also a new information regarding the film. The 2020 Metro Manila Film Festival recently held their virtual awards night in which Fangirl won 8 awards, which are Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and Best Sound. Wow. Congratulations to them, and they're all well-deserved. Regarding your question, if you can get a physical media release of it, I do hope that there's someone out there who can release Fangirl in physical media. Physical media is closer to obsolete nowadays in the Philippines as their home video releases are now mostly through digital, but maybe someone in Arrow or Second Sight or Criterion or whoever out there can release the film and other acclaimed Filipino films in physical media. I don't know if there will be sales, but why not? Right now, if you want to watch Fangirl, you can only watch it online on the VOD platform Upstream. But I will recommend to you Filipino films that are available on Blu-ray that you might be interested to get. First is the 2018 action film Buy Bust, directed by Eric Matee and starring Ann Curtis and MMA fighter Brandon Vera. It's about a drug raid operation that went wrong one night in the slum area of Manila. I highly recommend that film, and I think you will dig it since you also love The Raid. There's also the 2013 neo-noir action film On the Job, also directed by Eric Matee. It tells the story of 2 hitman prisoners who are temporarily freed to carry out political executions and 2 law enforcers tasked with investigating the drug-related murder case connected to the prison gun-for-hire business. I also highly recommend that film, and it's critically acclaimed with a 94% score on Rotten Tomatoes and received a standing ovation when it was screened at the Cannes Film Festival. I think you'll love that as well. Another Filipino film available on Blu-ray is the 1975 Filipino classic Manila in the Claws of Light, directed by the late Lino Brocka. The film is available on Blu-ray from Criterion, and it was restored in 4K, and one of the special features has an introduction from Martin Scorsese. Manila in the Claws of Light is considered as one of the greatest films in Filipino cinema. The story centers on a young fisherman from a provincial village who arrives in Manila on a quest to track down his girlfriend who is lured there with the promise of work and hasn't been heard from since. I want to see that. In the meantime, he takes a low-wage job at a construction site and witnesses life on the streets where death strikes without warning, corruption and exploitation are commonplace, and protests hint at escalating civil unrest. Since you love world cinema, you should definitely get this one, and it will give you an introduction to the best of Filipino cinema. Well, let's do it this way then. That movie sounds like it is right up my alley. Manila in the Claw. You know what? Manila. Light. Criterion. Manila in the there's a song Manila in the Claws of Light. There's an MP3 of that. I'm sure it's not related, but we shall see. How interesting. I did not know that. You know what? How's it not showing up? It's not showing up. That's weird. I'll have to. You know what? I'll find it out. I will go get that on the Criterion page or something. Last but not least is the 1976 Filipino classic Insang, also from Lino Brocka, which is available as well from Criterion. See, I didn't know these, and it's on Criterion. I'll get them. The film centers on Insang, who leads a quiet life dominated by household duties, but after she is raped by her mother's lover and abandoned by the young man who claims to care for her, she exacts vicious revenge. The film is also critically acclaimed and a classic of Filipino cinema. It is the very first Filipino film to be shown at the Cannes Film Festival. The film bombed at the box office when it was released, but it is now known as one of Filipino's best films. It has a 100% score right now on Rotten Tomatoes. Anyway, that is all my letter for now. I hope you'll get the physical media of these Filipino films and check them out and perhaps feature them on Let's Get Physical Media. If there's someone out there who works for Criterion or other distributors who are watching this, I hope you'll consider picking up other great Filipino films. I can give them a good list. Thank you, Rob, for reading, and stay safe. I'm going to keep this and I'm going to read it and I'm going to get these films. This one comes from Clement Gordon. Hi, Rob. How's everything? Been a fan for a long time, and this is a Star Trek question. I agree about what you say about Star Trek, and I'm a fan like you of the original Star Trek to Voyager, and after Voyager, well, that was it for Star Trek. I would like to know, what is your favorite Enterprise spaceship? Mine is the refit from the motion pictures. Well, Clement Gordon, I can answer that question. It's going to take me a minute, but I'm going to answer that question. What is my favorite Star Trek spaceship? You said the refit, first introduced in the beginning of Star Trek the Motion Picture. I will answer that question, but I need a visual aid. So if you'll indulge me for a moment. I better not trip, that's all I can say. This, my friend, is my favorite spaceship from Star Trek. I think the greatest fictional starship of all time. Yes, that's right. The Enterprise from Star Trek the Motion Picture. So, here you go. Boy, do I love this. Now, this does light up. Unfortunately, it's not plugged in, obviously, because I'm holding it. But let's see if you can see. It's a little dusty too. It's stuck. Well, I can't. Oh, this is really stuck in here. Let me see if I can show it. I don't know if you can really see this because it's you have to light it up, but maybe I can get you to. No, you can't see it. Unfortunately, the whole shuttle bay lights up. And now I've got to figure out a way. How can I keep talking to you while I'm holding on to this? I don't know how to do that. That'll be kind of interesting. I can just hold it here. Dun 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 dun. Dun. Anyway, that was the last letter I had. Let me see what else you guys have for me over here. Now I've got to put this down somehow. It's really hard. Let me see where we're at here. Where are you guys at? Where was I? Attic Hatch Sound is here. Hello, Attic Hatch Sound. Sends in a super chat. Ever since seeing Anson Mount in Hell on Wheels, I thought he would make a great Dark Knight. He's really great. He's really great. And you know what? Anson Mount participates. I guess I can't say that. We'll find out. Also, for good examples of scary shorts, see Crypt TV. Absolutely. By the way, one of the great shorts, the last short I posted for the Intergalactic Imagination Connoisseurs Film Festival, There's Something in the Silence, is a pretty great horror short, so check it out. It's on the page. Kevin the Comic Doctor says, if the next Spider-Man film is successful and fans show a keen interest in either Garfield or Maguire's Spidey, could we perhaps see more films with their versions of Spidey as the main hero again? I wouldn't put anything past them. So maybe, why not? Why not? Lindsay Disney sends in a super chat and says, wouldn't Steve Trevor try to report back to the U.S. government once he came back? He was a captain in the military before he died. Yeah, but I don't know. He knew he was in the afterlife. He knew he was dead, so I don't think he would. Who's he going to report to? And then, of course, La Laguine de Nakamas comes back and says, Bizarro needs modifications for the big screen for sure. But if we take inspiration from horror films, Frankenstein and Quasimodo, it's possible. No, I think so. It is. It's just the job of the director in place. Everything gets risky when it comes to Warner Brothers, laugh out loud. You are correct. But I still think making Bizarro work is hard. You know, it's hard. And is that what people would want to see in a villain? I don't know, man. I certainly do love this model. Anyway, that brings me to the end of Robservations episode number 587. I would like to thank my moderating staff. The Richard is here, and if you want to interact with my moderating staff, you can go to the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page. There's also a Whining About Movies Facebook page and a fully articulated Facebook page where I guess people are going to start posting pictures of their own action figure collection. So go there and interact with the moderating staff. The Richard is here. I see MC Blackcap is here. Justin Toner is here. Joshua Levesque is here. Robert Pariso is here. Wow, this is a potpourri of moderators. I want to thank them for making this show as good as it is. And I want to thank all of you for supporting the channel with super chats and with tips and with letters. And if you want to send a letter to the Burnettwork about any of our shows, if you want to have Dieter Bastian read your letter on Let's Get Physical Media, all you have to do is go to the website, theburnettwork.net. You can leave a 3-word review. You can interact with everybody. You can send me letters there, and I'll read them. And if you want Dieter Bastian to read your letter in his great German accent, his Saarbrücker Deutschland accent, just specify that, can Dieter read this letter? I promise I won't take it personally. But on that note, I would like to say thank you all very much for being here for Robservations, a show about something, episode number 587. I will be back on the John Campea show tomorrow morning. I will be back on this show. We have a Whining About Movies tomorrow night. And then Wednesday, we will have what is it? What are we doing? We're doing Fully Articulated, and I will be joined by Az from Heel versus Babyface in the UK and Justin from Justin's Collection on YouTube. If you haven't watched his YouTube channel, you can salivate all over Hot Toys figures or do whatever you want all over Hot Toys figures. I'm not one to judge. But Justin, he's in Melbourne, Australia, Az is in the UK, and here I am in California. We are going to have a talk about the future of Hot Toys and where we think licensed action figures are going to go and why we like them. And it should be a great talk. I love Justin's channel. If you haven't, look, even if you just want to find out, like, Rob, what's all this Hot Toys business about? Go to Justin's channel. Check it out. It's called Justin's Collection. He just put up a video of a new collection video of all of his figures. And, man, it's cool. It also makes me green with envy. And on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I want to say to all of you, have a better day, and I will see you tomorrow. I love this model. Oh, it's just so beautiful.